Where Wisconsin meets Minnesota, a small ice-cold river finishes a 22-mile run by doing something remarkable. It pours so much clean sand into the St. Croix that it has built its own delta, a bright spit that pinches one of America's great protected rivers down to a quarter of its width. The river is called the Kinnickinnic, and the locals simply say the Kinnie. It holds one of the densest wild trout populations in the Midwest, and it ends here, in a state park created the very same year this stretch of the St. Croix became a national wild and scenic river. Today, we walk the bluffs and prairies above that meeting place. This is Kinnickinnic State Park. Let us set the map. We are in Pierce County in far western Wisconsin, where the St. Croix River draws the border with Minnesota. The twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul sit just over the horizon to the west, close enough that this valley feels their pull. The Kinnickinnic rises from springs in neighboring St. Croix County, flows through the college town of River Falls, and reaches the border river here. A few miles downstream, the St. Croix itself empties into the Mississippi at Prescott. The park sits on the wooded bluffs and open uplands wrapped around that final bend of the Kinnie. Kinnickinnic State Park protects about 1,242 acres at the meeting of the two rivers. Roughly 10 miles of hiking trails loop across these uplands and out to overlooks above the water. There is no busy waterfront development here, no marina, no row of cabins. The shoreline below stays wild, and most of the park is exactly what we are walking through now, grassland and hardwoods rolling toward the bluff edge. It is open year-round, and on a late August afternoon like this one, the trails are nearly empty. From the air, the reason this park exists is obvious. The Kinnickinnic has carried sand out of its valley for thousands of years and dropped it exactly where its current dies in the bigger river. The result is a broad, sandy fan that squeezes the St. Croix down to roughly 1/4 of its usual width. All the water of a major river has to hurry through that narrow gap, so the current quickens as it passes the delta. That simple piece of geography shapes almost everything else in this story. It even decides which birds spend the winter here, as we will see later. It is the 27th of August, and the uplands are deep in late summer. The grasses stand tall and gone to seed, the goldenrods are coming on, and the oaks hold that heavy dark green they carry just before fall. The walking is easy, gentle rises and long open stretches with the sky wide overhead. Every so often the land tilts and you can feel the valley wading off to one side. The plan is simple: cross the uplands, follow the bluff line above the Kinnie, and finish above the delta itself. These open uplands are not an accident. They are a restoration project. Before European settlement, much of this high ground carried prairie and scattered oaks rather than closed forest. Farming changed that, as it changed nearly everything in this corner of Wisconsin. Today, park managers are working to return the unwooded uplands to the grassland communities that were here first. Walk it in August, and the logic is plain: deep-rooted grasses and wildflowers built for sun, wind, and thin bluff soils. Prairies like these are fire-born landscapes. For thousands of years, periodic fires swept grasslands across this region, killing back brush and young trees, while the deep-rooted prairie plants simply resprouted from below. Take fire away, and the prairie slowly drowns in woody growth. So restoration here means more than scattering seed. It means bringing back the old rhythm of disturbance that grasslands depend on. The reward is what surrounds us, an open sweep of grass and flowers on a bluff top above two rivers. The trail bends now toward the Kinnickinnic side of the park, and the character changes. Oaks and other hardwoods close in, the light goes green, and somewhere below, out of sight, the little river is cutting its final miles through a rock gorge. You often hear the Kinnie Valley described with one word: quiet. The park literature promises the solitude of the river valley, and the trail delivers it. It is worth pausing here to ask about the name itself, because the word Kinnickinnic carries a story. Kinnickinnic comes from the Ojibwe language, from a word meaning tobacco mixed with other plant material for smoking. Kinnickinnic was a blend, often stretching scarce tobacco with dried bark and leaves gathered from the land. The word attached itself to places across this region, and Wisconsin actually has two rivers called Kinnickinnic, this one and another in Milwaukee. It is a name about mixing, which suits a river that ends by folding itself into a larger one. That brief nod to the deeper past made, our trail belongs to the river itself, and the river's story is cold water. As the trail steps down toward the valley, you can feel the temperature ease. Some of that is simply shade, but some of it is the river announcing itself. The Kinnickinnic is a genuinely cold stream, even in the heat of August. That coldness is not luck, it is plumbing. To understand it, you have to look underground. The Kinnie does not begin as a trickle of rain, it begins as groundwater. The river rises from springs, and along its course, cold, clean feeder creeks seep out near limestone outcroppings and slide in to join it. Groundwater holds close to the same temperature all year, so the springs work like a thermostat, cooling the river in summer and keeping it open in winter. That steady cold is the single most important fact about this river. It is what turns a modest 22-mile stream into something anglers travel across the country to see. The Kinnickinnic is a Class 1 trout stream, the top rating Wisconsin gives, reserved for high-quality waters where wild trout sustain themselves by natural reproduction. Stretches of it are also designated outstanding resource waters, a legal shield for the state's cleanest streams. Native brook trout hold in the cold upper reaches, and wild brown trout thrive through much of the river. Population surveys here have produced startling numbers, with estimates in some stretches approaching 9,000 trout in a single mile. Few streams anywhere in the Midwest carry fish that densely, and the river's last wild miles run right below this park. The trail now rides the rim of the lower valley, and this is the stretch that stays with you. The Kinnie's final miles cut through a rocky gorge on their way to the St. Croix, and the trail traces the high ground above it. Big pines stand along the edge, and through the gaps you catch the glint of moving water far below. It feels far wilder than a place this close to a metropolitan area has any right to feel. There is a reason this particular landscape carries a special designation of its own. The gorge and the delta together form the Kinnickinnic River Gorge and Delta State Natural Area, a landscape singled out for protection within the park. Here the river runs beneath sheer limestone cliffs, with stands of majestic white pines rising above the water. White pines line the banks of the Kinnie through this final reach, giving the valley a northwoods character well south of the Northwoods. State natural areas protect the best remaining examples of Wisconsin's native landscapes. This one protects a cold trout stream finishing its run through rock and pine, which is about as good as the state gets. Here is a detail worth carrying down this trail. Measurements on the Kinnickinnic show the water runs roughly 4.5 degrees colder above the town of River Falls than below it. Same river, same springs, same summer sun. The difference is what sits in the middle, and what sits in the middle is a pair of dams. For a trout stream, 4.5 degrees is not a detail. It can be the line between thriving and merely surviving. That story begins with the town's founding. So let us go back to 1848. In 1848, the year Wisconsin became a state, a settler named Joel Foster put down roots by the falls of the Kinnickinnic upstream of here. In 1854, brothers Nathaniel and Oliver Powell arrived from northern New York, established a village there and named it Kinnickinnic after the river. The town soon took a plainer name, River Falls, for the rapids at its heart. Like nearly every young town on falling water, it saw the drop in the river as an engine. Water power meant mills, and mills meant a future. Back on the trail, the path swings through hardwoods toward the St. Croix side of the park. Through the trees you begin to catch the big river, wide and slow and silver in the afternoon light. It is a calm scene, but the valley below carries the marks of ambitious centuries. Two rivers meet here and both of them were put to work. The Kinnie got dams and the St. Croix got the logging industry. In River Falls, the working river eventually meant two hydroelectric dams, Junction Falls and Powell, standing about 1.5 miles apart near downtown. Behind them, the Kinnie pools into two small impoundments, Lake George and Lake Louise. The ponds are pretty, but they change the river's nature. Slack water spreads wide under the sun and warms. Sediment that a free river would carry along instead settles and accumulates, and the wildlife of a cold, quick stream gives way to something poorer. Downstream, the trout feel every degree, and in the 21st century, River Falls began to rethink the bargain. A local movement to free the Kinnie took shape around 2014, and in 2018 the City Council approved eventually decommissioning both dams. In 2022, the city partnered with the United States Army Corps of Engineers to study the question, and in April of 2026, The completed study endorsed removing both dams and restoring the river's natural flow. The Corps found removal would improve water quality and lower water temperatures, critical for trout, while letting the river carry its sediment naturally. The dams produce less than 1% of the city's electricity. Few small towns anywhere have voted to hand a river back to itself. If it is carried through, the cold water of the Upper Kinnie will one day run cold all the way to the delta below us. Whatever happens upstream, the miles below us have always stayed free. From the last dam to the St. Croix, the Kinnie runs quick and cold through its gorge, and that is the water this park watches over. It is strange and a little wonderful that a stream can pass through a town, 2 dams and a century and a half of hard work, and still arrive here wild. Rivers are durable that way, if you give them room. The St. Croix beyond it tells the same story on a grander scale. In the 19th century, the St. Croix Valley was logging country, and the river was the highway. White pine from the northern forests came down the St. Croix in great drives, bound for the mills and the treeless prairies beyond. The riverway still holds the remains of logging dams and camps from that era, quiet ruins in the woods along the shore. It was an industry that built towns and fortunes and stripped the old forest in a couple of generations. That the river below us now reads as wild is not because history skipped it. It is because people later chose to protect it, and that choice has a date. The trail opens out now toward the St. Croix Overlooks, and the view starts to organize itself. The big river slides past below, its far shore in Minnesota, its surface streaked with current. This is the water that senators and citizens fought over in the 1960s, when wild rivers were vanishing across the country, one dam and one subdivision at a time. The fight they won reshaped American conservation, and it happens to be the reason the shoreline below us looks the way it does. In 1968, Congress passed the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and the St. Croix was among the original 8 rivers protected, a victory championed by Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin and Senator Walter Mondale of Minnesota. In October of 1972, the protection was extended to the lower river. The final 52 miles from Taylor's falls down to the Mississippi, the very stretch flowing past this park. Together with the Namekagon, the riverway protects some 252 miles of water, the largest scenic riverway east of the Mississippi. The law's purpose was simple: keep a few great rivers free-flowing and their shorelines unspoiled. Half a century later, you can stand on this bluff and see the result. Look up and down the valley from here and notice what is missing. No wall of docks, no ridge line bristling with rooftops, just wooded bluffs stepping down to the water on both shores. This is what a protected river corridor actually looks like on the ground. The designation does not empty the river of people. On a summer weekend, the St. Croix is busy with boats. It simply keeps the frame around them green. In 1972, the same year that frame was fixed in law, Wisconsin added its own piece to the picture. Through the 1960s, the Twin Cities metropolitan area was growing fast, and its weekend reach pressed into western Wisconsin. Landowners around the mouth of the Kinnie could see what was coming, and they were determined that the meeting of these two rivers would not be carved into lots. Citizens in the valley had already organized in the early 60s to defend the St. Croix from development. Out of that determination came a state park, established in 1972, the same year the lower St. Croix won its federal protection. 1,242 acres of bluff, prairie, forest, and delta, saved by neighbors who liked the view the way it was. And here is what they saved. From the bluff, the delta spreads out below, pale sand against dark water, the Kinnie braiding across it to find the St. Croix. The big river bends around the sand almost politely, squeezed into its narrow channel. It is an oddly southern-looking scene for the Wisconsin border, more sandbar lagoon than northwoods. On a bright August afternoon, the shallows glow. This is the postcard, and it was built one grain at a time. A delta is simply a river's cargo, set down. The Kinnie drains sandy country and runs quick, so it arrives at the St. Croix loaded with sediment. The moment its current meets the slower big river, the sand drops, and over centuries the drops have become acres. The fan keeps growing and shifting, channels wandering across it with every flood season. It is one of the few places in the region where you can watch new land being made. Most rivers on the border simply end. The Kinnie ends by building a beach. That beach has a social life. On summer weekends, boats gather off the delta and anchor in the shallows, and the sand becomes a front porch for the St. Croix boaters wade ashore to picnic, swim, and even camp on the sandspit, a beach day in the middle of a national riverway. Most of them arrive by water because the park has famously kept its shoreline undeveloped. It is a rare arrangement, a wild delta that doubles as a gathering place. The crowds go home at dusk, and the sand goes back to the herons. We turn back along the bluff with the afternoon leaning toward evening. The prairie has gone golden at the edges, and the oaks throw long shadows across the trail. Below, the two rivers keep at their patient work, one delivering sand, the other carrying it away grain by grain. It is the kind of walk that rewards an unhurried pace, and if you come back in the cold months, this same overlook holds one more spectacle. Remember the pinch in the river. Because the delta squeezes the St. Croix into a narrow gap, the current through it runs fast enough that the water resists freezing. In hard winter, when the rest of the river locks up in ice, a stretch here stays dark and open. Open water in January means fishing, and fishing draws bald eagles. They gather at the delta through the cold months, hunting where the river refuses to freeze. A sandbar that hosts swimmers in August feeds eagles in January, all because of geometry. The bird list here runs long in every season. More than 140 species have been recorded in this valley, roughly half of all the bird species that nest in Wisconsin, and on a good day in spring migration you might tally 85 or 90 of them. Wild turkeys, reintroduced to the park's woods in 1989, now strut the oak edges as if they never left. The understory belongs to deer, fox, mink, and the occasional beaver working the quiet sloughs. For a park barely a dozen miles from a state line and a metro area, it is remarkably good company. Keep your steps soft in the last hour of light and the valley will show itself. So that is Kinnickinnic State Park, a small cold river with a grand finish. A trout stream fed by springs, a name borrowed from an Ojibwe smoking blend, a delta that narrows a great river and builds new land, and a town upstream deciding to set its water free. It was saved by neighbors in the same year America chose to keep the lower St. Croix wild, and both choices still hold. If your travels bring you to the Wisconsin border country, walk these bluffs and give the delta an afternoon. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.